The gate guard's fingers closed around her arm before she could take another step. Halt. Authorized personnel only. His voice was hard, trained, the kind of voice that had barked 1,000 commands and never once doubted itself. She stopped, jaw tight, eyes locking onto his. Behind them, the chain-link fence rattled faintly in the wind, and somewhere down the road, boots struck pavement in perfect rhythm, a column of recruits marching toward a future none of them could yet imagine. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing who's listening. Her name was Captain Mara Ellison, and she had walked through gates like this one for 11 years. But today felt different. Today, her orders had come through a different channel, quiet, unofficial, urgent. She hadn't expected to be stopped. She hadn't expected a stranger's grip to close around her wrist like a verdict already decided. The guard, Petty Officer First Class Danny Voss, had seen thousands of faces pass through this checkpoint. He prided himself on his instincts. Something about the woman standing before him didn't match the file in his hand, the file he'd been told to intercept, to verify, to question before allowing entry. His clipboard trembled slightly, though he'd never admit it. Dust caught the morning light between them, drifting like slow static in the tension. "Ma'am, I need you to stand down until I confirm your clearance," he said, softer now, though his hand hadn't loosened. Somewhere behind him, the low murmur of soldiers in formation seemed to hush, as if the whole base was holding its breath. Mara didn't flinch. She had learned long ago that fear shown at the wrong moment could cost more than a mission. It could cost respect, and respect was the only currency that mattered here. "Then confirm it," she said evenly. "But you'll want to hurry. I don't like being late." Voss flipped open the file clipped to his board. He'd been told only that a woman matching this description would arrive, that she required special handling, that her identity needed triple confirmation before she set foot past the barrier. His eyes scanned the photograph, young, sharp-eyed, unmistakably her, and then dropped to the name printed beneath it. His breath caught. Rear Admiral Z. Kane. Clearance, highest level. The world seemed to tilt for a half-second. He had grabbed the arm of a woman who outranked nearly everyone on this base, including the officer who'd handed him the file that morning. He thought of every command he'd barked in his career, every certainty he'd carried like a shield, and in that instant, all of it felt fragile, borrowed, waiting to be tested. She thought he'd simply apologize and step aside. She was wrong. Voss straightened, but he didn't loosen his grip just yet. Instead, he asked the question that had been eating at him since she stepped out of the sedan, the question procedure demanded, even now. "Ma'am, if you're who this file says you are, why did you arrive alone? No convoy, no announcement. Admirals don't walk through my gate unannounced." It was a fair question, and it was the one Mara had been dreading. The truth was this. She hadn't come as an admiral today. She'd come as something smaller, something more human. A mother whose son was 200 yards past that gate, standing in a formation of recruits who didn't yet know their drill instructor's temper, their barracks' cold nights, their own capacity for exhaustion and doubt. She had pulled rank quietly, called in a favor, and arrived without ceremony because ceremony was the last thing she wanted her son to see. She wanted him to become a soldier on his own merit, not in the shadow of her stars. But explaining that meant exposing a vulnerability she'd spent a career hiding. Admirals weren't supposed to have soft places. They weren't supposed to need anything. The murmurs around them grew louder. Other soldiers had noticed the standoff at the gate, the young petty officer gripping the arm of a woman whose file now visibly bore the highest clearance on the base. A senior chief jogged over, alarmed, ready to intervene, ready to relieve Voss of a mistake that could end a career. But Mara raised her free hand, stopping him before he reached them. "He's doing his job," she said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "Better than most would." He questioned a stranger's story instead of a stranger's rank. That's not insubordination. That's integrity. She looked back at Voss, and for the first time, something in her expression softened. Not weakness, but recognition. "You didn't back down when it would have been easier to look away. That's the kind of sailor I trust with a gate. Keep doing that." Voss finally released her arm, his hand unsteady, his throat tight, with something between relief and awe. He hadn't expected mercy. He'd expected consequence. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he managed. "I was only following." "I know," she said, "and you did it right." She told him then, quietly, about her son, not as an admiral, but as a mother standing at a fence, watching a formation march away from her, wondering if she'd raised him strong enough for what waited beyond that gate. Voss listened, and something in him shifted permanently, the way certainty always shifts when it meets a truth larger than procedure. Because kindness doesn't vanish. It waits, and it finds its way back, even at a gate where two strangers nearly mistook each other's hearts for their ranks. And somewhere past the barrier, a young recruit marched on, unaware that the woman who once carried him now stood in the dust behind him, letting him walk forward alone, because that was the bravest kind of love there is. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments what part stayed with you the longest. And if you believe integrity still matters more than rank, hit subscribe so you never miss the next story that reminds us why.